The missing voice. Why Hindu suffering rarely makes headlines, written by Rathi Agnihotri. Despite centuries of persecution and ongoing violence, Hindu suffering finds little voice in global media or culture. Hollywood stars rally for Gaza, but when Hindus bleed, the world looks away, exposing a devastating narrative imbalance. A recent open letter from film workers for Palestine gathered over 4,000 signatures from the global film fraternity, pledging to boycott Israeli institutions accused of genocide and apartheid against Palestinians. Among the signatories were celebrated directors like Ava DuVernay, Jonathan Glazer, Asif Kapadia, Joshua Oppenheimer, and Boots Riley, along with stars such as Emma Stone, Andrew Garfield, Olivia Colman, Josh O'Connor, and Cynthia Nixon. Since the escalation of the Israel-Gaza conflict, Hollywood has embraced the Gaza cause with unprecedented fervor. Pro-Palestine activism has become a marker of cultural currency in the entertainment world, with concerts, open letters, and social media campaigns turning into performative rituals of woke solidarity. A search for celebrities supporting Gaza yields a star-studded list: Bella Hadid, Dua Lipa, Angelina Jolie, Natalie Portman, Billie Eilish, Mark Ruffalo, and many others. Now, contrast this overwhelming celebrity mobilization with the silence on Hindu suffering. The Pahalgam terror attacks, the 26/11 Mumbai massacre, the ongoing anti-Hindu pogroms in Bangladesh, targeted killings and political violence in West Bengal, and the sharp rise in anti-Hindu hate crimes in the West have failed to elicit even a murmur from the global film industry. Forget about Hollywood A-listers. Even Bollywood celebrities are quicker to lament the plight of Gaza than to speak up for the lives, dignity, and rights of Hindus. This alarming disparity points to a bitter truth. Islamists and left-liberal ecosystems have perfected the machinery of narrative. They relentlessly amplify their causes until even extremist violence is whitewashed as resistance, while their cultural allies in Hollywood and beyond lend glamour and legitimacy. Hindus, by contrast, have yet to master the art of narrative building. Despite having genuine grievances rooted in survival, safety, and cultural preservation, the community remains voiceless on the global stage. This silence is not accidental. It stems from the deeper structural disadvantage Hindus face in academia and cultural institutions. What follows is a closer look at the Hindu community's inability to project its concerns effectively and its weakness in the arena of narrative building. Hindus unable to influence cultural narratives in Snakes in the Ganga, Breaking India 2.0, Rajiv Malhotra and Vijaya Vishwanathan expose the funding mechanisms of elite Western universities, particularly their social sciences and humanities departments. They argue that much of the scholarship produced by these institutions is essentially Hinduphobic. Their observations, backed by detailed evidence, help explain why the Hindu community has been unable to influence global cultural narratives. Elite Western academia functions as a trendsetter for the creative industries, arts, and literature. Issues amplified by these departments are soon echoed in film, music, and publishing, backed by generous funding. A clear example is the widespread support for Gaza in the creative industries. Its prominence in popular culture directly reflects the exposure it receives in social sciences and humanities research at places like Harvard. By contrast, Hindu concerns are almost invisible in concerts, art exhibitions, literature festivals, or cultural showcases. The institutions that define the cultural agenda are already steeped in Hinduphobia, and this is where the marginalization of Hindu issues begins. Making matters worse, the Hindu community has largely failed to package its concerns in ways that resonate with the progressive framing that dominates cultural discourse, leading to even deeper marginalization. The problem is compounded by how Hindu concerns are portrayed academically. When Hindu issues are raised, they are quickly reframed as Hindutvadi, fundamentalist, or anti-minority. Left liberals and Islamists use these labels to delegitimize Hindu perspectives, pushing the community into a defensive corner. Even Hindu celebrities rarely speak out on such matters, leaving global cultural spaces dominated by voices hostile to Hindu concerns. Adding to this challenge is the way funding in Indian arts and culture is often used to reinforce anti-Hindu narratives. Malhotra and Vishwanathan cite the example of Hindu billionaire Lakshmi Mittal's funding of Harvard's Mittal Institute and its visiting artist program. They highlight how some grants under this initiative have supported ideologically driven artist activists, such as dancer Malika Sarabhai and vocalist T.M. Krishna. The program has also emphasized performances like Qawwali while inserting divisive themes of caste and Brahmanical patriarchy into artistic presentations. In stark contrast, Islamists have built robust alliances across civil society to advance their agendas. They collaborate with intellectuals, artists, writers, and filmmakers, leveraging long-term mechanisms of influence. Their toolkit includes aggressive tactics such as public shaming, trolling, and organized boycotts to silence opposition. The boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS movement is a telling example. Radical Islamists, in partnership with left liberals, have turned Israel bashing into a global academic and cultural industry. The BDS campaign uses PR, propaganda, and institutional pressure to boycott Israeli businesses and individuals. In India, self-styled woke intellectuals with Hindu-sounding names openly endorse BDS, and left-liberal media outlets brand any criticism of these positions as Hindutva propaganda. BDS networks have also allied with the anti-Hindu caste politics ecosystem, exploiting internal Hindu fault lines and magnifying them within their ideological framework. This leaves Hindus in a uniquely vulnerable position. While Islamists and their allies exploit identity politics to amplify their concerns, Hindus lack comparable mechanisms to advance their own. What the Hindu community needs is a collective front that mirrors the organizational capacity of movements like BDS. A Hindu equivalent could channel support for Hindu issues while simultaneously challenging the funding structures that sustain anti-Hindu narratives. Crucially, such an initiative could be strengthened through alliances with the Jewish community, which has also suffered from radical Islamist targeting. The Jewish community is not only resourceful and influential, but also sympathetic to Hindu concerns. A joint platform modeled on BDS, but focused on countering anti-Hindu bias, is both viable and necessary. There is already a foundation for Hindu-Jewish solidarity. Both communities have experienced persecution and misrepresentation, and both value civilizational continuity. Expanding these ties into coordinated efforts to influence creative industries and cultural institutions could be an essential step forward. By pooling resources, expertise, and networks, Hindus and Jews together could disrupt the dominance of anti-Hindu narratives in academia and popular culture. In essence, Hindus must learn from the methods of their opponents. Building sustainable collectives that apply pressure on businesses, cultural institutions, think tanks, and media organizations is critical. At the same time, Hindus must invest in creating a consolidated network of funding to support research on Hindu issues and ensure the Hindu perspective is represented in the arts and social sciences. Insiders' apathy, the curious case of Hindu billionaires in Snakes in the Ganga, Breaking India 2.0, Rajiv Malhotra and Vijaya Vishwanathan highlight a troubling paradox. Hindu billionaires such as Anand Mahindra, Lakshmi Mittal, and Ajay Perumal donate generously to elite Western universities like Harvard. Yet this philanthropy seldom results in a more balanced or even moderately sympathetic understanding of Hindu issues. Lack of due diligence means their donations often reinforce Hinduphobic narratives. The book also shows how this funding acts as a pipeline for Harvard-imported ideologies. Woke frameworks incubated in Western academia are being reintroduced to India through initiatives sponsored by Indian business houses. Over time, these ideas shape the arts, humanities, and social sciences in Indian universities, deepening an academic climate that often turns against Hindu traditions. This is especially striking when contrasted with the other philanthropic work of these billionaires. They support temple construction, maintain gaushalas, sponsor mass marriages, and fund cultural festivals that celebrate Hindu heritage. Yet, in the crucial arena of countering anti-Hindu narratives in academia, media, or popular culture, they are largely absent. A Stop Hindudvesha analysis describes this as the brown sahib mentality. For many wealthy Indians, true prestige lies not in strengthening their community's intellectual ecosystem, but in gaining recognition from Ivy League institutions and mingling with Western elites. For them, Validation by the West often becomes the ultimate marker of success. This neglect has serious consequences. By neglecting to fund institutions and research from a Hindu perspective, these billionaires leave the field open for hostile forces, a gap that reinforces the same disadvantages already seen in academia and media. This vacuum at the top mirrors the vulnerabilities faced at the grassroots, where Hindu communities abroad often find themselves exposed to structural discrimination without the backing of strong institutions. Hindu community in the West. Victims of structural discrimination. The Hindu community in the West occupies a paradoxical position. On the surface, it appears affluent, educated, and politically influential. Yet beneath this image of success lies a stark reality. Hindus have little ability to shape policies in their favor or protect themselves from systemic prejudice. A striking example is California's anti-caste discrimination bill SB 403. Despite widespread opposition from Hindu advocacy groups, grassroots protests, and multiple efforts to explain the bill's Hinduphobic undertones, the state legislature still passed it. Although Governor Gavin Newsom eventually vetoed the bill, stating that caste discrimination was already illegal under existing law, the fact that such legislation was passed in the first place reveals how easily Hindu communities can be singled out and portrayed as inherently discriminatory. It underscores a structural bias within the system, one that paints Hindu identity in negative terms regardless of evidence. Compounding this problem is the powerful alliance of Islamists, left liberals, and Khalistanis who dominate the narrative ecosystem. This coalition consistently frames Hindu advocacy as an extension of Hindutva politics, allegedly exported from India and empowered by Prime Minister Modi's government. The result is a double bind. Hindu organizations in the West are routinely dismissed as foreign agents, making them targets for both far-left activists who demonize them as majoritarian and far-right actors who treat them with suspicion. Another major shortcoming is the community's inability to build coalitions with other marginalized groups, such as African Americans, immigrant communities, and progressive human rights organizations. While Islamist lobbies have monopolized these alliances, Hindus have struggled to position their issues within the global language of justice and equality. Yet, opportunities remain. With careful strategy, the Hindu diaspora could forge progressive partnerships, particularly with African Americans and Jewish communities, creating broader legitimacy and acceptability for Hindu concerns in international forums. Islamophobia versus Hinduphobia. The contrast between Islamophobia and Hinduphobia is instructive. Over the past 2 decades, Islamophobia has been institutionalized as a recognized global issue. The United Nations has gone so far as to dedicate an official day to combating Islamophobia, providing Islamists with a powerful tool to frame themselves as a victimized community deserving of special protections. This framing resonates deeply in academia, popular culture, and the media, producing a thriving cultural industry around pro-Palestine activism and even normalizing apologetic for violent groups such as Hamas. Hinduphobia, on the other hand, remains invisible. Despite India's repeated calls at the UN to recognize prejudice against Hindus, the international community has largely ignored the issue. As a result, hatred, bigotry, and violence directed at Hindus, whether in Bangladesh, Pakistan, West Bengal, or Western societies, receive little acknowledgement. Hindu voices struggle to find any representation in global arts, literature, academia, or media. The root problem lies in the Hindu community's failure to position itself as a victimized group within global discourse. Instead of documenting its long history of persecution and discrimination systematically, Hindus often rely on fragmented advocacy. There is an urgent need for comprehensive resources, detailed accounts of anti-Hindu genocides, documentation of communal violence leading to mass displacement, records of hate crimes, and critical studies of discriminatory laws targeting Hindus in India and abroad. While several advocacy organizations have begun producing such reports, their work remains scattered and lacks the consolidated force needed to influence international media outlets, think tanks, and global institutions like the UN. Here, the Hindu community could learn from Islamist strategies. By skillfully leveraging identity politics, Islamists have built coalitions with other marginalized groups and successfully portrayed themselves as victims of systemic oppression. Hindus must adopt a similar approach, framing their issues within the broader vocabulary of human rights, forging alliances with other victim groups, and amplifying their narratives across multiple platforms. Media Narrative Wars Stop Hindudvesha has extensively examined how Hindu issues are represented in Western media. Many of these analyses point to a persistent pattern. Leading outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, BBC, The Guardian, and Deutsche Welle portray Hinduism and Hindu identity through a lens that is overwhelmingly negative, often steeped in Hinduphobia. A key feature of this bias is the obsessive focus on caste whenever Hindu Dharma or India are discussed. Complex civilizational traditions are reduced to caste narratives, flattening Hinduism into a caricature of oppression. In sharp contrast, coverage of Islam in elite Western media tends to be carefully balanced, even deferential, with strong emphasis on respecting the sensitivities of Muslim communities. Islamophobia is covered extensively, and often sympathetically, across major platforms. Meanwhile, Hinduphobia is either ignored outright or dismissed as a conspiracy theory, supposedly concocted by the BJP and Sanghh Parivar to silence criticism. The result is clear. Hindus are losing the media narrative wars. Despite the presence of many Hindu-origin journalists and writers in these prestigious outlets, the community has been unable to influence the editorial agenda in its favor. Instead, several journalists with Hindu-sounding names actively work against their own heritage, becoming brown sepoys who reinforce and legitimize toxic anti-Hindu narratives for Western audiences. Veteran journalist Ashok Srivastava explores this dynamic in his book Modi vs. Khan Market Gang. He exposes the entrenched networks of the Khan Market Gang, a clique of elite Delhi journalists and media moguls who once wielded such influence that they could reportedly even shape cabinet appointments. Srivastava's analysis underscores how deeply anti-Hindu forces are embedded in the Indian media ecosystem itself. Even after a decade of governance by what is often described as a Hindu majoritarian government, mainstream media coverage of Hindu issues has improved only marginally. The rot is structural, both in India and in the West. Why critique alone isn't enough. The Hindu community has invested a lot of energy, but in scattered or reactive ways, lacking consolidation and reach. Reports, op-eds, and social media campaigns often highlight bias in global and Indian media. While important, critique alone is insufficient. Simply pointing out bias will not ensure fair treatment. If Hindus remain reactive, their issues will continue to be sidelined. What is required is a parallel narrative machinery. Hindus must not only call out distortions, but also proactively create content and shape discourse. This means addressing the same gaps already noted in academia and philanthropy, while extending the effort into mainstream media and cultural industries. Here's a proposed action plan for Hindus to step up their narrative game. Youth mobilization. The Hindu ecosystem is weak in youth engagement, a space thoroughly captured by left liberals, Islamists, and their allies. Hindu concerns must be repackaged in a way that resonates with younger audiences through progressive language, creative cultural forums, and youth-led initiatives. Campus outreach. Universities are breeding grounds for ideological shifts. Hindu organizations need innovative outreach programs on campuses, presenting Hindu issues not as confrontations with liberal causes, but as legitimate concerns deserving recognition in their own right. Institutional infrastructure. Temples must evolve beyond places of worship into centers of cultural exchange and intellectual engagement. While the dharmic consciousness of the society has certainly risen, and Indians now look at their own civilizational heritage with a renewed sense of pride, the change hasn't percolated down to all functions of society. Consolidated social media strategy. Social media remains underutilized by Hindus. What is needed is a coordinated, multi-pronged digital campaign that amplifies Hindu issues globally. High-quality multimedia content, consistent messaging, and targeted outreach could transform the online landscape. Cultivating political champions. Hindu politicians in the diaspora must step up as mobilizers and advocates. By bringing Hindu concerns into mainstream political discourse, they can legitimize issues otherwise dismissed as fringe or communal. Streamlined digital resources. Scattered advocacy must be consolidated. A single authoritative digital collective could serve as the go-to global resource on Hinduphobia, compiling reports, case studies, data on hate crimes, and analyses of discriminatory laws. Such a platform would become indispensable for journalists, researchers, and policymakers seeking information. Media outreach. Hindus need to nurture the next generation of journalists who can enter and thrive in mainstream newsrooms while offering balanced perspectives. At the same time, Hindu philanthropists should invest in building or funding media outlets that operate in mainstream formats yet remain rooted in Hindu values. Without this, the monopoly of hostile voices will remain unchallenged.